Silence by Robert Lynd. Reading out essay titled Silence by Robert Lynd, taken from the book titled English Composition Book 5, edited by the famous headmaster, Father Aloysius G. Rego of St. Joseph Collegiate, Allahabad. Silence. Robert Lynd, 1879 to 1949, a famous essayist, entered journalism in London and became a literary editor of the News Chronicle, and also for many years wrote weekly articles for the New Statesman over the signatures Why. He wrote a great number of essays on a vast variety of subjects, all in the Lamb tradition, intimate, inconsequential, with an artistry and charm all their own. The essay given below is taken from Lynd's The Money Box. Silence. Silence is unnatural to man. He begins life with a cry and ends it in stillness. In the interval, he does all he can to make a noise in the world. And there are few things of which he stands in more fear than of the absence of noise. Even his conversation is in great measure a desperate attempt to prevent a dreadful silence. If he is introduced to a fellow mortal and a number of pauses occur in the conversation, he regards himself as a failure, as a worthless person, and in full of envy of the emptiest-headed chatterbox. He knows that 99% of human conversation means no more than the buzzing of a fly. But he longs to join in the buzz and to prove that he is a man and not a waxwork figure. The object of conversation is not, for the most part, to communicate ideas. It is to keep up the buzzing sound. There are, it must be admitted, different qualities of buzz. There is even a buzz that is as exasperating as the continuous ping of a mosquito. But at a dinner party, one would rather be a mosquito than a mute. Most buzzing, fortunately, is agreeable to the ear, and some of it is agreeable even to the mind. He would be a foolish man, however, who waited till he had a wise thought to take part in the buzzing with his neighbors. Those who despise the weathers as a conversational opening seem to me to be ignorant of the reason why human beings wish to talk. Very few human beings join in a conversation in the hope of learning anything new. Some of them are content if they are merely allowed to go on making a noise into other people's ears, though they have nothing to tell them except that they have seen 2 or 3 new plays, or they have had bad food in a Swiss hotel at the end of an evening during which they have said nothing at immense length. They justly plume themselves on their success as conversationalists. I have heard a young man holding up the monologue of a prince among modern wits for half an hour in order to tell us absolutely nothing about himself with opulent long-windedness. None of us except the young man himself liked it, but he looked happy, as if he had a crown on his head. Many of us indeed do not enjoy conversation unless it is we ourselves who are making the most conspicuous noise. This, I think, is a vice in conversation, but has its origin in a natural hatred of silence. The young man was such afraid of silence that he dared not risk being silent about himself, lest a universal silence should follow. If he failed as a talker, it was because he did not sufficiently realize that conversation should be not only a buzz, but a sympathetic buzz. That is why the weather is so useful a subject. It brings people at once to an experience which is generally shared and enables them, as it were, to buzz on the same note. Having achieved this harmony, they advance by miraculous stages to other sympathies, and as note succeeds note, a pleasant and varied little melody of conversation is made, as satisfying to the ear and mind as the music of a humming top. The discovery of new notes of sympathy is the secret of all good conversation. It is because this is necessary to good conversation that a conversation of a party of three is often a failure. Two of them discover a note of sympathy and they begin to buzz on it, enthusiastically forgetful of the fact that it is an occasion not for a double but for a triple buzz. Two of them perhaps have been at the same college or university. They go for an hour happily sharing experiences in sentences like, "You remember that old crocker? You remember the day he. You remember the night he stole the policeman's helmet? But the funniest thing of all was the day he threw the bowl of tulips upon the window and nearly brain doled," naming a famous professor of Greek. Reminiscences are the best conversation in the world for two. They warm the heart and excite the brain like wine. But the third man is all the more conscious of being out in the cold because these names and events, which are a sort of algebraic symbols of the emotions to them, are to him meaningless. He does not know who old Towser was, or who was old Billy Tubbs, or who old Snorter Richardson. He smiles mechanically as the others laugh with dreamier and dreamier eyes over incidents that convey all the fun of youth to them, but that to him seem mere inanities of the memory. A conversation of this kind is bad indeed, because it condemns the third man to the torture of compulsory silence. You may have an excellent conversation of three where one man is voluntarily silent, but you cannot have a good conversation where one of the three is necessarily silent. It is not only in social life because that we dread silence. We love noise more than we know, even when no other human being is present. When you go from town to live in the country, we deceive ourselves if we think we are doing so in order to exchange noise for quietness. We go into the country not in order to escape from noise, but in search of a different kind of noise. Sit in a country garden in May and you will notice the noise is continuous. The birds are loquacious as women. The bees as inimical to silence as children. Cocks crow, hens cackle, dogs bark, sheep baa, cartwheels crunch, and the whole day passes in a succession of sounds which would drive us to distraction if we were really devotees of silence. When evening falls, the voice of the last cuckoo fades into universal silence. It is difficult to believe that the world is entirely uninhibited, and if it is not filled with the noises of men and animals, we begin, at least a good many of us do, to suspect the silence presence of something unseen and terrible. Noise is companionship, and I remember that I, as a child, liked even the tickling of a clock in the bedroom. How good it was to open the bedroom window and hear the pleasant throes of a corncrake coming through the meadows, through the darkness. There are sounds that are terrifying at night, but they are chiefly so because the silence that is broken by them. The breathing of a cow behind a hedge as you pass along a silent road at midnight may startle you, but it is not the cow. It is the silence that has startled you. If nature indeed could contrive to maintain all her busy sounds through the night, darkness would lose more than half of its terrors. For complete silence produces feelings of awe in us, even in the full blaze of day. If you could imagine yourself the last living thing on earth but the plants, and if you knew that you were immortal and secure from danger forever, what horror you would feel of a world in which there was no sound but the sound of your own feet or of your own voice, if you had the heart to use it. If there were birds and dogs, and cats and cows and sheep, you might endure your solitude with philosophy. I should not care for it myself even then, but I should suffer less than if I were the last living creature on a silent globe on which a motionless sea never broke the stillness of my shore. We spoke for the silence of the grave, and without noise the world would be no better than a grave. To survive alone upon its lifeless surface would be to be buried alive, and most of us, if we were given the choice, would commit suicide in order to escape from it. This is not to say that we never enjoy the awfulness of silence. Travelers in the mountains and among snows, discoverers of dead and deserted cities, can thrill us with their description of the profound stillness of the scenes, as though to penetrate into such silences were to step into a new world. Silence such as this keys us up to unaccustomed excitements and susceptibilities. London, seen from Westminster Bridge in the silence of dawn, moved Wordsworth with a majesty unknown in the busy clamour of noon. In silence, we seem to approach the border of some mysterious reality that has escaped us in the din of common life. Hence, it is that if we go into a cathedral, we are offended by those who bring into it noise and restlessness. The cathedral moves us most deeply in perfect stillness. It is no more superstitious that bids us to be silent, or if we speak, lower our voice to a whisper. We cannot even see the cathedral, so that its beauty passes into the imagination and the memory, save it perfect silence. Certain religious bodies have recognized the value of silence, and mystics have told us that it is through silence rather than speech that we arrived at a knowledge of the secret of life. Certainly, the increase in the noisiness of mankind does not seem to lead to any great increase in wisdom. Cynics are doubtful whether any useful end is served by the ceremony of 2-minute silence that has now become an annual event in England and some other countries on Armistice Day. But having been in London Street when all the traffic died down into perfect stillness and every human being in sight stood motionless as a stone in a silent world, I, like a million other, have felt the spell of transformation. London of the bus and dray and warehouse seemed to be touched with a mystery and strangeness that meant more to the imagination than the hooting of horns and the hurry of trampling feet. One aged man indeed did advance through the death-like stillness of the figures of his fellow creatures, an aged man in a faded bowler and with a pipe in his mouth. I do not know whether he even noticed that the men and the women had suddenly become statues and that the traffic of the streets was as still as the palace of the sleeping beauty. There was no sound on earth for a time but the whisper and squeaking of the old man's boots, becoming less and less as he disappeared into the distance. Instead of breaking the silence, it seemed to intensify it, and no one even turned ahead to look after him. Perhaps he had never heard of Armistice Day. Perhaps, lucky man, he had never heard even of the war. But how typical he was of his kind, in his incapacity for remaining still. The rest of us, it is true, can succeed in remaining silent for 2 minutes. But at the sound of the gun, with that a cheerful tumult will rush back again into the clamor of ordinary life.